I'm so glad everyone can make it tonight, and I'm honored that you all would share your evening with us. Before I introduce the event and everything, I just want to thank my co-editors, Jennifer De Leon and Ben Black. Over the course of the past year, we've been hard at work soliciting, selecting, discussing, and editing the work that would be included in this portfolio. We had late night emails and hour-long Zoom calls in 3 different time zones that made for some really interesting logistical coordination, but it was worthwhile every step of the way. It's been a long road, one with tangents that led us into more work we discovered and fell in love with. And I couldn't be prouder of what we have accomplished and put together here. So thank you also immensely to Bill and Suchi for their guidance and leadership along the way at AGNI. And a special thank you to Diego Isaías Mendez Hernandez, our artist for the issue. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Diego, but Jennifer, Bill, and Suchi can attest to his dedication to helping others and in bringing art to the public sphere. Despite the hoops that we had to go through in order to attain his artwork for the issue, we're honored to feature his beautiful and moving paintings on our cover right here and throughout the issue. And I highly recommend you check out more of his work. Now, when I began drafting ideas for this portfolio, specifically focusing on the word diaspora, I couldn't help but think of my grandmother and the afternoons we'd spend crossing into Mexico. I'm from the Rio Grande Valley, which is located in deep South Texas, and one memory of crossing from Mexico back into the United States kept returning to me. It was a hot and humid afternoon. The turnstiles were sticky, bent and dented, worn from years of hands, chests, belt buckles, and the ashy elbows of children like me. I felt I'd earned the right to swing through them, to take the final steps from the turnstile to the heavy glass door to the parking lots, where hordes of weekend cars were baking in the heat. But the customs agent didn't believe my grandmother was my grandmother. His complexion was darker than hers, and from his accent, I thought he must have a grandmother from Mexico too. My grandmother frantically pulled documents from her purse, shuffling through baby photos that then fell on the floor. She insisted that I was who I was and that she was who she was claiming to be. But the agent kept telling us in a mix of English and Spanish that something wasn't right here, that we needed to step to the side while he and the other agents now swarming around us sorted this whole mess out. My grandmother was escorted to a room. I was seated just outside the door on a bench. Some time passed, and then an agent squatted in front of me. She was soft-spoken, motherly, even in her uniform, and she asked if the older woman inside the room was indeed my grandmother. I nodded, unsure if my acknowledgement would get her in trouble, but the agent said that I had nothing to be scared of, that I could tell the truth because they had already called my mother and she was on her way to pick me up. 2 decades later, I kept returning to those moments with my grandmother, teasing out the details of that summer day at the US port of entry, and wondering how she felt being accused, as my mother would tell me in adulthood, of trying to kidnap a white child. You see, my grandmother and I looked nothing alike. She was short, her face was weathered by a childhood working in the fields, her staticky hair was done up in an efficient bun, while I had straight hair, a gringo's complexion, and a last name I couldn't pronounce. My tongue was already deeply scarred with an English-only vocabulary. The agent took one look at us and decided that our differences were too big not to warrant suspicion. And there was, in fact, a step missing between child and woman, though not for the sinister reason the agent wanted to believe. A whole generation, country, and language divided my grandmother's world from mine. That gain and loss, that clarity and misunderstanding, that acceptance and shame are at the heart of what editors Jennifer De Leon, Ben Black, and I wanted to explore here. Years from now, when a reader or editor looks deep into the AGNI archives and finds this portfolio, we believe they'll see the subjects and themes that preoccupied us in our time. We expect that every poem, short story, and essay included will contribute to their understanding of the people who claim part of Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Belize, and El Salvador as their own. If they look on this page as the way I looked at my grandmother after that incident so many years ago, eager and ready to embrace the new and deeply familiar. And with that, I pass the baton to Ben Black. Thank you all.
Hi, everyone. It's been great working on this portfolio with Esteban and Jen. And I was just thinking we're not gonna do it anymore. This is it. I kind of miss working with you guys on this specific thing. It was quite an amazing thing to pull together. And I want to encourage everyone out there to also check out the online portion of our portfolio. If you have the magazine, the little QR code is in there, or you could just go online. There's a lot more poems and things and recordings available online. I'm going to introduce our first reader. Let me pull my notes. Krista Timeus Cerezo hails from Guatemala, currently lives in Barcelona. In addition to AGNI, her fiction has appeared in Puerto del Sol and On the Run. She works as an assistant editor at Narrative Magazine. And her fiction fits well with the themes in our portfolio. She focuses on the experiences of women living in places that are not yet, or sometimes not anymore, home, and the forces that push and pull them in and out of connection with others. Her story in AGNI in particular, All the Things We Hid, that's the title, is an exploration of class differences, generational misunderstandings, and codes of behavior within a single household. It's three characters, a woman, her mother, and a maid. And I just reread it again, and these characters, I remembered them, they stuck with me. And I still think about them. So I hope you'll enjoy reading it, and I hope you'll enjoy hearing now from Krista. Are you there? Great.
Here. Thank you. I'm so moved. I want to start by saying thank you to everyone at AGNI for putting together this portfolio, and especially to Ben Black, Jennifer De Leon, and Esteban Rodríguez, and to the Transnational Literature Series at Brookline Booksmith for hosting us. I'm so humbled to be included in a portfolio that celebrates Mexico and Central America, but especially Central America, which is where I'm from, because it's a tiny region that sometimes gets lost in this huge continent, but packs so much history and culture and just doesn't always get as much positive attention as it deserves. So thank you. I'll be reading from All the Things We Hid, which is a story featured in AGNI 99, and I'll be starting about a page into the story. The first time I met her, she was in a cloud of steam that smelled of beef and cooked potatoes, back when my family lived in the nicest neighborhood in San Salvador. This was before my father left us, before my mom and I moved in with my grandmother, before my grandmother died. Both of my parents worked full-time jobs, so every day when I took the bus home from school, except on Thursdays when I had art class, the only person in the house was the maid. After lunch, I'd do homework until my mom came home. I was 13 and an only child. I was accustomed to being alone. We'd had many maids over the years. My mother treated them with the same disdain that most women of her class and generation used with servants in our country. She often fired them to prove she could, as if the fact that these women washed her floors wasn't enough to clarify who was in charge. Before Daniela, we had Martina, whose flaw was oversalting meals. Before Martina, there was Vilma, who my mom accused of stealing food. And the one before Vilma was fired for taking a bath in my tub. My mom caught her in the act and kicked her out with her hair still dripping wet. So when I first saw Daniela, I made a bet with myself about how long she'd last. As far as I could tell, the only thing that differentiated her from the rest was that she was only a few years older than me, maybe 17 or 18, and very pretty. Daniela filled a bowl with beef stew and placed it on the kitchen table, which she'd set for 2 people. Your mother told me lachas is your favorite. I stared at the plate and then at her, feeling shy about her confusion. She looked concerned. I could tell she'd been warned not to displease my mother. Is something the matter? It's just that I usually eat in the dining room, I said. All by yourself? My mother would have considered the question an insult. The maids were there to work, not to keep me company. I nodded and shrugged as if to say I never considered anything different. You poor thing, Daniela said. They were always kind to me, the women my mother paid to keep house. Until that day, it had never occurred to me that perhaps they pitied me. She stirred herself from the pot and set her plate on the table across from mine. Come eat with me. There was a spark of complicity in her eyes, as if we'd been friends for years. I was shy then, and her invitation gave me a rush of energy. For the first time, I sat down to eat with the only other person who was home at lunchtime. "Don't slouch," my mother said that evening, putting a hand on my shoulder and twisting it to straighten my back. We were at the dining table, just the two of us, and Daniela was serving our dinner. In my mother's view, respectable families kept strict schedules. At exactly 7 p.m., an hour after she came home from the high school where she was principal, the two of us would sit in the dining room and wait for my father. He was an anesthesiologist and often came home late. The maid stood by the kitchen door while my mother tinkled with a gold medallion of the Virgen of Guadalupe that hung from a gold chain around her neck. She'd turn her wrist to look at her watch, and if it reached 10 past and he still wasn't home, she'd nod at the maid to serve our dinner. We almost always heard my father before he opened the door. He had a nagging cough from a bout of asthma years before, and it worsened in the evening. If he was in a good mood, he'd talk straight through dinner, asking me about school before telling Mom about his work. Those were good nights. But when he poured himself a glass of scotch before sitting down to eat, Mom and I knew to sit quietly through dinner and slip away as soon as the plates were cleared. Every evening as we waited, my mother asked the same thing. "What did you do today?" Sometimes I'd tell her, and sometimes I wouldn't. It depended on a certain quality in the air around her body. There were many things my mother worried about: her work, my father's drinking, my grades. By now, I knew intuitively how not to burden her even more, how not to add to all the things my mother carried by carrying some of them myself. That first night, I could tell from the way my mother kept flattening the creases in her napkins that our evening would just crumble if I told her I'd eaten lunch with Daniela. I replied to her usual question with a shrug, "Just my homework." Daniela set a bowl of soup in front of me, and I thought I heard her exhale when I didn't mention lunch. But whether with relief or dismay, I couldn't tell. When I looked up, my mother's eyes were on the door. Whatever she was thinking was already worse than any lie I could tell. When Daniela asked me to have lunch with her the next afternoon, I knew I was forgiven. And just like that, for the first time in my life, I had an ally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Krista. I remember that was one of the first stories. That was one of the first stories we read, and knew absolutely that it would have to be a part of the portfolio. So really appreciate your words. In one of two poems featured in this portfolio, William Archila speaker says that the body is a bridge suspended, and that the bridge is but a promise that there are three crows on a limb of a tree, which is to mean that inside the speaker, there is an ellipses about to be redacted. In Archila's poetry, his speakers find a way to erase those ellipses of uncertainty, stepping back from doubt to provide a clear understanding of the subjects that any immigrant might contemplate: the physical and spiritual plight of refugees, the politics of forging fear against migrants, the longing for acceptance on land that is as open to opportunity as it is indifferent to change. In the books, The Art of Exile and The Gravedigger's Archaeology, Archila has chronicled his own immigrant experience from El Salvador, writing about the consequences of displacement and the connection one world has with the other. Archila said the following of his immigrant experience in the essay post, Mine Own Neruda, published in AGNI in 2018. "I was 12 years old. I arrived in Los Angeles, California, with many questions unanswered, conversations unfinished, and years of my young life unfulfilled. I gave up much of my national culture and Spanish language to learn a new culture and language. My English was full of street vernacular and strong, raw accents. My words squashed, shredded, forced to dance a Shakespearean rag. I became part of the growing immigrant community, speaking ghetto Spanish. Go back to your country echoed throughout these years. Ahead, a long road stretched into darkness. That darkness is what any immigrant must contend with. And as I read this, I couldn't help but think of Archila's poem, Childhood, in its closing lines. The speaker, after reflecting on his father and the country he left behind, says, "It's so frustrating knowing all I have to do is turn off the light to occupy the dark. The light no doubt shines when we don't have to pause, when there isn't any hesitation to confront what is so often not said, when even the thought of an ellipses is replaced by the need to speak and let the truth guide us through the darkest of labyrinths. It's an honor to welcome to the virtual stage, William Archila.
Thank you, Esteban. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here. I want to thank Brookline Booksmith, AGNI, Ben, Jennifer, and Esteban as well for the portfolio. It's a wonderful collection. I'm also honored to be reading with such a stellar lineup today. I'm truly, truly humbled. I want to read 4 poems, and they're not perfect sonnets. They're disheveled sonnets, the ghost of a sonnet, if you will, and they are all untitled. First, I'm going to read the 2 from the portfolio. But there is no migrant crisis, no suffocation in the back of a cargo truck, no bodies bag and gag in a mass grave somewhere in Texas. Somewhere in Arizona, plant life beats out shipping containers. I understand this is strictly my problem. Probably much more than you think, particularly the way they disappear the species, wandering tribes of red eyes and owls gone. Maybe disappearing is another way to be noticed. Maybe that's how you doubt everything you're told, everything you read. You even mistrust the red buttons on the remote control, as if you're not from these parts. You don't know how to speak after dark. But there is no migrant crisis. No brown boy or spook smoking in the doorway. No black and bruised bananas or republics. Only the intricate clatter of crybabies pleading the 5th. Maybe. I'm just saying. The dirt they threw upon him was vibrant. This is the second one. Inside me, there's a refugee returning home after the war. The problem is there's no one at the station. He's got a bag, got some boots, got no medal. It turns out twilight matches his coat. To say alienation is to say the park rises with picket signs. And to say signs is to repeat what's happening in the trenches. Not that I'm not a resident. Not that I don't have a nation. None of this. But I'm thinking about the body, how it is the body of a bridge suspended. And what is a bridge but a promise that there are 3 crows on the limb of a tree, which is to mean inside me there is an ellipsis about to be redacted. Everything beneath is beneath me. That's really the only problem. What can I repeat precisely that's equal to this homecoming? Is it really me? I don't want to talk about it, but when I'm ready, no one's willing to hear it. Okay, so I want to read another one that I felt could fit perfectly into the portfolio. It's another untitled sonnet. When I am drunk enough, I am reminded I can frame whatever I want. Between you and me, home. Between you and me, the eyes of a binocular. Between you and me, 14 lines I promise myself. There must be one thing I can do to hold out. Rubbing charcoal on my teeth in a gas station mirror is a candidate. Hallucinating that tomorrow the sun will yap in English is another possibility. I peer at mirrors and read, Chuco was here. Someone has broken a line across it, which is to say, Chuco cannot outlast the weather or the brother across the other side of the mirror. Whatever. I ride trains. No, I mount the top of trains. My head under my shirt is not a truthful identity. My 4 feet in the plat of dirt insist I am the sun's faithful dog. I chew grass and spit clouds. Please don't touch me. Illegal, I grow malaria. I grow dengue undocumented. I don't know where I'm going, but I like it. And I would like to close with the poem that opens my new book, SS4, which recently won the Philip Levine Prize for Poetry. And again, it's another untitled sonnet. Posting, boasting, 80 rounds from an officer, burning, looting. The life of a miner always leads to a line of corpses. Segregated schools, segregated hoods. Not enough money in the bank for representation, for a voice, for a commercial. Be mindful of Minutemen, pilgrims, unidentified men unhinged, who donate money to old white men in suits executing laws. Take note of drug trafficking with the pistol of a teenage assassin. Pay attention to his invisible hoodie stitched to his head. Try to count backwards. Try days swollen and cracked backwards. Try School of the Americas in Georgia. Try Atacatel Battalion. Try City Hall. Try the coroner's log. Be vigilant of the government as the ghost of God, including Michelangelo and his cadavers. Also taking care of other people's babies, cry babies, and shit loaders. Wiping, mopping. What else? What else makes you disappear? Thank you, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, William. Those are absolutely stunning poems. I'm really glad that you're here tonight. The worst things last on the skin, writes Sara Borjas in her poem, Lies I Tell, an honest and moving portrait of a person attempting to come to terms with her identity, the unspoken past, and the notion that the circumstances, characteristics, and cultural complexities we inherit don't always define who we are. While Borjas' poetry is always in tune with the personal and familiar, writing about her relationship with family, the landscape, and even language, she also has an eye toward the world at large, looking at the injustices that shape human behaviors and actions. In an interview with Luna magazine, Borjas says the following about our culture and the experience of memory. There's not a thought that I have that isn't conversing with my doubts and my own oppressive tendencies. I feel like we, Chicanas, are always living in a time of intense colonization, liberation, and the present moment, which makes every moment tense and potentially reckless. But Borjas recognizes that just because something is tense or potentially reckless doesn't mean it doesn't deserve a space for conversation, an opportunity to be brought to the forefront of our collective thinking, and a chance to right the wrongs that continuously get overlooked. Fighting the status quo and centering those that have been historically forced to the margin is at the heart of Borjas's voice, exemplified when we hear her speaker in Homo Naledi, one of the 2 poems that grace this portfolio, say, "What can I hold in this life that to stay sacred, to matter, even as I fight dogmas that promise I don't? I want the oppressors to find my body and be reminded that I was never scared to sleep." Her collection, Heart Like a Window, Mouth Like a Cliff, does just that, and her work is a testament that it is possible to redefine old narratives with new ideas, despite whatever challenges emerge. To quote Danielle Steele, one of the authors Borjas read prolifically in her youth, "Sometimes we have to face the things that hurt us most. Maybe you won't heal till you do." Borjas's poetry reminds us that we don't have to ask permission to heal, and most importantly, to live. It's an honor to welcome Sara Borjas.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Esteban. It's really cool when you get a dope bio and you're like, oh my God, I did that? Cool. So thank you for that. I'm going to share 4 poems with you, 2 which were like very carefully and thoughtfully edited by Bill from AGNI. So I just want to say, Bill, thank you for doing that work. Thank you to the editors and all those emails and all those Zoom calls. There is no work in literature without all the people behind the scenes. And just know that you are truly appreciated here from Oakland, California. And lastly, I just also want to thank Sven, Bill, and Shuchi. Shout out. Thank you for putting your attention on this diaspora. I'll read 2 poems from AGNI and then two new poems. This first one is called Homo Naledi, and it's after that Netflix documentary, if you probably saw it. Homo Naledi. Homo Naledi placed a stone in their dead's hand to carve the next world, the sacred parts. I've acquired no daughters or money, no new ideas. And someone stole my Hyundai this past February in Oakland. I want to bear something beautiful, but I'm juggling 7 incomplete futures, a down payment for a house, marriage to a man, knowing better but doing it anyways, my romantic admiration for women, DEI committees, and my mother, who she might have become had I stayed inside. I reach for futurity and end up with my grip on a centuries-old wound there at the back of my heart, a fine, sharp stone, my delicate, decolonial tool. Do you ever wonder if free and loss are the same disconnection? What can I hold in this life to stay sacred, to matter, even as I fight dogmas that promise I don't? I want the oppressors to find my body and be reminded I was never scared to sleep, that I still loved my struggle and managed to get my nails done, having felt cute and died before deleting. I want my hopelessness and coloniality, my amusement with the temporary power of white people and men, riddled across my tireless clutching hands. I want the colonizers mystified at how I dug with rubble this far. I want them to grow sick from studying me. This next poem is called Palestine is Showing Us That Decolonization is Not Abstract. Nothing reminds me that we are sacred so much as the extent they've gone to kill us. Our call a jar of ears collected from those caught speaking our language, or how conquistadors threaded the ears they'd sliced from children's heads and forced their mothers to wear them around their necks. Maybe I could recall my ancestors being raped with the neck of a rifle, nostrils and eyes packed with dirt and pebbles from each thrust of the gun. Maybe I could remind you, reader, that they sold our sons, and by doing so, erased our hearts. Maybe I too can maim our children if we got so desperate and call it an accident. In the face of such violence, nothing can save us from who we will become. And I can't stop becoming. I am understanding. I understand. My dignity means nothing when I've lost my people, my land. When I have no future, I'm not ready to also lose. Lately, at night, I lie awake, dreaming of a teen avenging his family, all murdered in their sleep while taking shelter outside a collapsing hospital on a few feet of dirt. We are flying over a fence on a paraglider with our mother's school photo strapped to our heart. We are crying above the earth for our moms. We are crying for life. I was listening to like a meditation once and driving home to Fresno, where I'm from, through the Central Valley. And oh no, it wasn't a meditation. It was actually like a therapy group. My bad. It was actually like a therapy group. And you know, I know it's like a visual meditation, you know, like sometimes folks will like take you and they're like, you're here and this is what's look to your left and that's here and that's here. And they're like, you're in Central Valley in California. And where I'm from. And then at some point the therapist said, you know, like something through the valley where no one really lives. And I was like, there's just so many layers of like erasure happening, like on a Thursday. It really tripped me out. So I was inspired to write this draft. This is a draft I'm working on. It's called Even Our Meditations Are Colonized. You breathe on the blank floor, wanting so bad to belong to this world. When a British voice says, open your eyes. Cross-legged, you await the bell's toll, just like your ancestors in the mission. Romanticized. You want to be able to reinstate your consciousness, but grandma's arm is reaching out for you from under your birth, a joyous genocidal wound. Crooked shadows embrace the responsibility of how I arrived, but not the fault. Alone, I cannot solve my existence, undo my self-regard's tangled powers. I unslit my ancient eyes, slowly, softly, and drive north. The British guide in my meditation tells me to look down the long field of California's Central Valley, where no one really lives, where I am going, where I was raised. And I know dedications will fly from the prisons tonight at 6 p.m. on Mega 97.9. The voice tells me I am powerful enough to change this moment. My breath settled on stolen land that I love, meditate on, while some musician's fingers trace the strings of an unwelcome and unfortunate harp. I'm a fool, trying to connect to all beings while listening to recorded birds. And this last poem I'll read is part of a series that I'm working on forever, called Decolonial-ish. And this is a self-portrait. It's called Decolonial-ish Self-Portrait. I remember myself, a chair turning, a desperate blue tunnel crossing the mirror in the lavender hour. I remember myself, corner of sunlight on the bed sheet rotating of violence, words that die before meaning, relentless, shredded threads. I remember myself, sky chained to torture, futurity chokes, an ancient throat melts in my posing. I remember myself, a swipe in the dust on my dresser, a drawer full of rotten Catholic teeth. Thank you all for listening.
That was incredible. I'm sorry, my mind is like just imagining all the images that you shared, and it's just really powerful. So thank you. And thank you to everyone. I'm really thrilled to be here and to have played a role in helping to shape this portfolio with my co-pilots, Esteban and Ben. I just always feel so honored to be doing this work in this lifetime, in this limb of my big family tree. So thank you all. Speaking of family tree, my two sons are in the next room. So I hope that they don't come in, but actually if they come in, it would be amazing too. So I have the pleasure and honor of introducing our next reader, which will be Alexandra Lytton Regalado. And I'd like to share a little bit about Alexandra right now. Sorry about that. So I'd like to share a little bit about her formal bio and then highlight just a bit of her writing. Alexandra Lytton Regalado is a Salvadoran American author, translator, and poet. Her book, Relinquenda, won the National Poetry Series, and her book, Matria, won the St. Lawrence Book Award. She holds 2 MFAs, one in poetry from Florida International University, and another MFA in fiction from Pacific University. She's a Letras Latinas and Canto Mundo Fellow and the winner of the 2015 Coniston Poetry Prize. Also the co-founder of Kalina Publishing. Alexandra is the author, editor, and/or translator of more than 15 Central American theme books. That's incredible. She also has a black belt in karate and currently lives in San Salvador with her husband and 3 children. And it was such a pleasure to discuss your story, Dichoso Fui, and to live in this world. I can't do it justice by talking about it. She'll have to read maybe from this, I hope. If not, something else is fine. But the story is so visceral. That's the word that comes to mind. It's just very sensory. And having spent time in Central America, in my case in Guatemala, I just was so brought back to this world. And there's this paragraph in the story describing Manuel and his job at the supermarket. The smell of raw meat and detergent blasted out every time the sliding doors sliced open. Years ago, he'd witnessed a man in a butcher's jacket haul a side of beef through the front door of a supermarket. And struck by the pink muscles and bone, Manuel had followed the blood trail down the cleaning products aisle. Day in, day out, he took in currents of cold air, death, and the quick cover-up of antiseptic. I just feel like that is a metaphor and just describes so much of this whole portfolio, of this body of work, of conversations that the work is sprouting, and I hope continues to sprout among all of us and the readers. So I thank you so much for your work, and I can't wait to read more and more of your writing.
Thank you for that intro, Jen. All of my love and admiration to all the contributors of this issue, and a special thanks to you, Jen, to Esteban, to Ben, and the entire team at AGNI for taking so much care with our work and for lifting us up, and also to Brookline Booksmith for showcasing this event. I also want to send a special thanks to Bill for the eagle-eyed editing. I really appreciate it. I want to read just the beginning of the story. The only thing I can preface to say is that I wrote the story maybe 10 years ago, the draft of it, let's say. But now that I'm living in El Salvador right now, we've been living under martial law for almost 2 years, or a little more than 2 years. And so that means we have no constitutional rights, and 75,000 people were jailed in 5 months. And I can't really say much more because our freedom of speech is restricted. But today, it's likely that a young man such as Manuel, the main character in the story, would be in jail. So I'm going to read just the beginning of the story. Dichoso fui. Manuel now lived off a switchback path near the old coffee fincas, a place where radio signals got lost between the mountains. Handwritten and misspelled signs offered tortillas. Little stores were bannered with Coke ads, and chipped turquoise paint trimmed the houses. Spray-painted gang signs dripped over political party colors, and dogs snoozed in the middle of the road. From the bus into town, Manuel watched the landscape scroll by, mountains giving way to Santa Tecla's squat adobe houses, and then into the haze of Merliot's strip malls. At each stop, more people piled in, a jigsaw of bodies pressed together, women with their purses strapped across their chests, men looking leery or guilty beneath their hats, as trumpets of salsa urged the bus forward, on and on through the winding streets. Men rode on pickup beds unharnessed, gripping the railings of custom-built cages meant for cattle. Beyond, the peak of the San Salvador volcano watched over the capital, its face unequivocal and hard against the sun. Manuel remembered that morning 1 month ago, when he'd awakened on his mother's doorstep with a sandalia slapped to the head. Good for nothing, she screamed, just like your father. Last night at El Chivo's sister's quinces, they'd winced their way through a bottle of muñeco. He and El Chivo in their scratchy suits, rosette boutonnieres bobbing up and down the rattling beat, riding up on the satin trains of the quinceañeras, all that sweet flesh bursting from their starched bustiers. 1 shot, 2, 12, the glinting tiaras and gloved hands of the girls. Sweat-soaked and slumped over a table, Manuel stared at the 2-tiered buttercream cake with its display of tiny girls in tulle skirts. Fresh out of Zacatras, 6 months, a jumpstart course on new business tactics, with the Gothic points of a new tattoo peeking from his bow-tied neck. El Chivo boasted about his new crew, how Manuel would like them, parties, drugs, girls. But Manuel thought of his neighbor Marta and her honey-colored eyes, how she'd been missing for days and was then found strangled in a ditch, the 5th girl that month. Cops zigzagged through the rat-hole maze of La Campanera, handcuffed and hauled off all the Marosos, no questions asked. Manuel's mom moved him out of their matchbox house and sent him to live on the town's outskirts with his grandmother. It was his job to stand sentry at the supermarket. During breaks, he chatted with the cashiers. He liked to watch their red fingernailed hands grasp and release as they swiped packages across the scanner. The bag boys with their greased back hair and tight jeans teased the young clerks, poked them in the waist, and broke into donkey laughs. They hustled to help the housewives with full baskets, the only customers who tipped. Manuel watched them carry the bags out, all those nice cars gleaming in the lot. Sometimes he wished they were his, but other times, gripping the barrel of his shotgun, he felt content to do nothing more than stare off into the lanes of traffic beyond the food stalls that offered hot dogs or burgers. It was nearly noon, and through the store windows, Manuel watched one of the barefoot boys waiting in the cereal aisle. In her cart, a woman wheeled a blonde child, rosy-cheeked as the apples imported from the US. The barefoot boy didn't tug at sleeves. He just waited for the housewife to notice him, his arms wrapped around an extra-large box of cornflakes and a bag of powdered milk. Manuel had seen other mothers buy him saltines and cream cheese, a toothbrush and mint paste. The woman nodded and gestured for the boy to put the milk and cereal into her cart. Then they turned into Home Goods, where the boy picked out a pair of blue flip-flops. He knew all the right moves. Everybody deserves shoes, a good breakfast. Manuel had seen the boy steal more than once, but he'd kept his mouth shut. He'd kept walking when El Chivo pulled a knife on the secretary on the overpass and stole her cell phone. Why would he start tattling now? In the checkout line, the mother unstrapped her daughter from the cart and placed her next to the barefoot boy. The little girl smiled and swiveled her head to whip her blonde braids while her mother laid out asparagus, a bottle of wine, pears, and cold cuts on the advancing belt. Without meeting her mother's eyes, the girl slid 2 chocolate eggs onto the conveyor. The woman opened her mouth, but then just shook her head, smiled at the boy, and took out her credit card and handed it to the clerk. After she'd paid, the boy took the items, looked her right in the eyes and said, "Thanks," and ran for the door, the little girl following. "Stop, stop," the mother called out, and Manuel reached over to the girl before he stepped off the sidewalk, cupping her shoulders. He directed her back to her mother, who gripped her daughter's arm, gritting angry words in English, while snatching one of the chocolate eggs from the girl's palm and gracias, handing it to Manuel. The boy dodged across 6 lanes of traffic, new rubber sandals slapping his heels, to the roadside shanties, a patchwork of plywood and corrugated zinc. The highway marked a dark seam across 2 worlds, the concrete and the lean-to. It spanned endlessly in opposite directions. Manuel didn't like the feeling of boundlessness. He liked to have his back to something, even if it was the hulking store. He'd grown up like the boy, certain only of what was behind him, putting one foot in front of the other, counting how many paces it took to get to that next place. It was something he liked to do, quietly count his footsteps. Sometimes he'd find he was repeating a phrase, "Please, God, please." Other days, a word would break into 2 syllables, Marta, Marta. Incantations that surprised him. He had not, until the moment the words tumbled from his lips, realized there was something he prayed for, something he wanted. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for that story. I know Krista, I said to Krista, was one of the first stories we picked, I believe. Yours, Alexandra, was one of the last, and I think we just needed something to make the portfolio feel complete, and it's definitely that story. So thank you so much. How far back must one go to reconnect with their past? How deep into the archives do we have to dig to find a part of our history that wasn't taught to us? What can a divinatory calendar from the 16th century tell us about ourselves today? Felicia Zamora's Undulations, featured in the online portion of our portfolio, is a poetic exploration of the Codex Yoeli Egalt, a pre-Columbian pictorial manuscript that contains 39 sheets of calendrical, ritual, and religious information centered on central Mexican gods, assembled and used either by the Nahuatl-speaking Tlaxcaltec people, the Choluteca people, or by the Mixtec. While the origins are not clearly known, what is clearly understood when you read these poems is that Zamora seeks to grapple with a history that doesn't recognize neatly defined borders, with a body that is as rewarding as it is complex, and with one's role in creating new ways of living, even through continuous obstacles. While one section might focus on chemotherapy and what it forces the body to endure, another looks at the Aztec deity Quetzalcoatl and the duality of language and life. Zamora's speaker recognizes that we are here today because of the past. And image after image, section after section, we see the ways in which she becomes increasingly aware of what this codex actually means to her. Saying in Undulations, Plate 8, I turn to this codex and find various faces of me among the rituals, various desires and meanings, lack of meanings, and how the earth too contains an I that simultaneously loves and wants to swallow me whole. It's this eye toward the past that found me thinking as I navigated through these images and texts. Another line in one of Zamora's poem, Meditations on Lines, with a speaker saying, before I was a cell, I was a whisper of a cell from another cell, a longing. As the author of 6 poetry collections, no one quite understands longing like Felicia Zamora, and it's a privilege to welcome her tonight.
Oh gosh, Esteban, I don't even that's just an amazing introduction. And I wanted you to just keep reading the work, because thank you for seeing it, like truly seeing it. It is a strange thing to travel across the world to Italy, to go to the Vatican Apostolic Museum and hold the Codex Yauyé. And of course, I mispronounced because I am estranged to Spanish too, which is part of this project actually. To hold the Codex Yauyé and or the Codex Borgia, you know, its colonized name, and to hold it, and to see it, and to, when they brought it out to me, I started crying, because I realized so few of us as descendants of Mesoamerica actually get to hold or see one of the only surviving documents from the Spanish colonization of Mexico. It was life-changing. It is a moment in my life that I will never forget. And I started studying the Codex because I was actually at the Gloria Anzaldúa archives in at the Benson Library in UT Austin. And Gloria kept mentioning the codices, and I realized that I wasn't fully aware of what the codices meant in lineage. And so I just took this rabbit hole into this codex specifically, and looking at the Tonapawali, and also looking at the Popol Vuh, and just realizing that there's so much, I think, that is lost because of empire, right? And as Sarah's work always reminds us, thank you, Sarah, Jesus Christ, powerful poems. People are dying. Like, people are dying right now. And still we're here, and we have words, and we look to the past, and we look to ourselves, and we look to the future, and hoping that there will be a future, because we know what empire looks like. And fuck no, right? Like, no, write what you can, do what you can, speak out as you can. There is nothing anti-Semitic about wishing genocide to stop, right? So I say this interacting with something that you know, is deeply divinatory. It is and thank you. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but thank you, Esteban, for that beautiful introduction, but also Jennifer and Ben for putting this together. Bill, again, for your editorial eye, which is always so, I'm so grateful for. I am going to read a few, but I feel like our words matter, and this is why we do this work. We excavate so we can learn from the past. So we can learn and say, let's not have another fucking culture lose itself because of empire too. Yeah, so let's see if this works. As Esteban so eloquently put it, this has me going backward to see, like, how far do I have to excavate to feel that I am part of something? and what I have lost in my time. And I do also want to give a shout out to Kristen Garza, who's here as an artist that I know. Thank you, Kristen. I wasn't able to say anything in the chat, and also S.A. Ledger. I see you. Thank you for being here and for being supportive. Yeah, let me see if I can bring these up. I believe I should be able to share something here. Aha! So I am going to start with a piece. So these are what the undulations look like. And the undulations are echoes, you know, they're moments of reverberation around something so meaningful that I was basically taken out of words. And so this is more of movements. And again, it's deeply personal combined with that which I was learning about the Codex. I am not an expert of Mesoamerican documents. I'm not an expert of ancient Mesoamerican, you know, archaeology, anything like that. And so it really is about the undulation, is about influence here. So this, I'm going to read Inverted in the Dark, the undulation from plate 8 of the Codex Yauya'e'ecatl. Inverted in the dark. How night reaches out here. The Tonalpoali arranged 5 rows, 20-day signs. The inverted human, not God, yet among the gods. Legs separated, mid-handstand, mid-cartwheel. 3 eyes in juggle between your feet. I understand being watched. I understand moving my body to appease the eyes of others, though regret riddles the webs of me. I understand wet licking eyes upon me, in spaces where I'm told you are not brown enough, and spaces where what are you prevails. I dig and become an archaeologist of enough. Enough monsters' eyes as my eyes. Enough of this performance. Who am I dazzling, if not my own acheful wound? Enough disbelief. Ancestors remind me how enough builds and roils in the collective. How far back must I dig to believe I am part of any collective? I turn to this codex and find various faces of me among the rituals, various desires and meanings, lack of meanings, and how the earth too contains an eye that simultaneously loves and wants to swallow me whole. To traverse being enough for a God, any God, the me God, and the godliness and the godlessness of my belief may just be enough. Here I go again thinking of godliness inside me. I obsess over value, how enough has been here waiting for me. So that is plate 8, keeping in mind that the codex is actually it is a accordion style manuscript written on animal skin that is read from right to left, and at sometimes on the page it's actually read from upper right down in a snake-like pattern to the left. The next piece I'm going to read is a real short piece as one of the undulations, and it's best to show these. These are all online, by the way. I get to be that like extended arm of the wonderful physical ephemeral book, because you know, these are kind of a lot and they're kind of big and they need to be zoomed into. So thank you all again at AGNI for attending to these pieces in the way that they need to be seen in the world. Let's see, so let me find it here. So this one is Undulations, plate 53, Descent into the Mouth of Earth Monster. And again, in ancient Mesoamerica, you know, there were not 4 directions. There were actually 5 directions. It was the 4 plus the center, being that which is core. In center, a hinge of space, hinge of time, rectilinear middles, middle of earth, open, hungry I am, the curve, the figure, upside down, head first into teeth. I pray to make the leap, heart first, heart first in to devour. And then I have one more. I'm sorry, I realized I have to go through all these screens. The last one I think I'm going to read is, yeah, I'll do this one. As I can find it here. As Esteban had mentioned, cancer was a part of this journey. I was actually diagnosed with breast cancer on July 15th of 2022. It was before I went to the Vatican to see the Codex. And I went and saw the Codex and then immediately got back and went and had the mastectomy and then started chemo. And there was a moment where I was looking at these images. The Los Angeles County Museum of Art, LACMA, had given me permission to use these images. And I didn't know what to say. You know, I had so many feelings and I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to talk about cancer. And then I realized that it was inevitable that I had to. And I couldn't look at the rituals, right? Like here, there's divinatory practices, there's marriage rituals. There is a long sequence where a human character, Smoke Eye, goes through a long journey to become like Quetzalcoatl kind of at the end of the journey. And then there's also practices around, well, there's just so much not known about the Codex as well, which is also, I love that. I feel like I have gaps and it has gaps and we kind of mesh together. So in looking at all the blood, there's so much blood in the manuscript. And for me, that blood meant something very different when going through chemotherapy, which is forcing me into menopause and forcing me, like, my blood to stop. So within the undulations, there's a sequence that has all the blood makes you pause. They're all the same title. So this last one is All the Blood Makes You Pause from Undulations, plate 44. You bled first at church, down in the basement bathroom, below the altar, rolling toilet paper around your hand, measuring the lining of your underwear. Insistence of blood in a girl's body, threat of leaking through, threat of the boy you desired pointing at your blood-soaked ass, threat of smelling iron and pubic hair, and the jokes across the one-armed desks. Girls throwing ketchup-soaked pads down the halls like hand grenades. You rarely thought of sacrifice then, even in the crucifix bathroom. Now you think of Smoke Eye and hummingbird costume, his last appearance in the ritual sequence. His supernatural journey through blood to become transformed. How many of your rituals require blood? What happens when the blood stops? Thank you.
Felicia, thank you so much. I remember seeing these poems in the queue and then immediately printing them out at work, which I'm not supposed to do, but I did it other ways. And knowing that I had to like really spend some time with them because there was a lot going on, but so much that was rewarding, moving, heartbreaking, and just amazing in general. So thank you so much for that. Adding humor to a serious subject is not an easy task, especially in poetry, when the public perception of what the genre should be gets lumped in with words like serious, depressing, and complicated. However, add too much humor, and critics in the poetic sphere might claim a poem and poet unserious or too simplistic. Balancing this tightrope is a delicate act, one that in the hands of Vincent Antonio Rendoni is done skillfully, empathetically, and quite frankly, hilariously. The ghosts of Pancho Villa and Francisco Madero look to ensure that the speaker's knowledge of Mexican culture is in tune with their identity in the poem Whenever I Say I'm Mexican. And in the unwritten rules of animating Speedy Gonzalez, instructions on how to depict Speedy Gonzalez and move past the stereotypes that make it a one-dimensional character speak to how we, as writers and as a society, can reclaim a part of popular culture that was for too long depicted by those perpetrating the status quo. The pair of poems that live in these portfolio pages remind us that we can turn the serious nature of any subject on its head with humor, and at the same time, be authentically ourselves because of it. Rendoni has shown this in his collection, A Grito Contest in the Afterlife. And in the title poem of his book, Rendoni's speaker says, after listening to the echo of a crowd of family and vendors in heaven, I hear them when it's dark and quiet. It can keep me up at night, but eventually I sleep better knowing there's something after this. This comfort is what great poetry strives for. And although we can never know what comes next, we can expect that with Rendoni's sharp voice and heartfelt narratives, we will be guided in the right direction. Please join me in welcoming our last reader of the night, Vincent Antonio Rendoni.
Thank you, gang. Can you all hear me okay? I just want to thank AGNI and Esteban and Jan and Shuchi and everyone who helped make this come to life. Thank you all for being here on a Thursday night for poetry. And I also want to give a quick shout out to Sara and Felicia. Like, I read your books like when I was getting into poetry 4 years ago, and now I'm reading with you. How fucking cool is that, huh? So I just, it's a big deal for me. So I'm glad you're here. Let's kick off with Whenever I Say I'm Mexican. Whenever I say I'm Mexican, I look over my shoulder for Subcomandante Marcos and the ghosts of Pancho Villa and Francisco Madero. Certain they'll burst through the door and run their hard fingers over my half-bred hair and gums and cut my crotch and tell me to cough and pop quiz me. Quick, when was the Battle of Puebla? Why do we not worship at the altar of Teddy Roosevelt? Can you name 5 Mexican states? Nuevo León, I say, Chiapas, Tabasco, Morelos, Guerrero. Bullet dodged, but then the ancestors are right behind them. They say, show me your grito, show me how you roll, little cub. I yell and I growl and I thrash, saying, you'll have to do better than that, hoping to the gods they won't ask me something in Nahuatl or Spanish, because even though I can respond with an accent, I speak like a blondie. Please, God, no further questions. Right. No, I didn't even tell you I was going to read 3 poems, because I know that audiences actually like to hear how many you're going to read, which I'm going to try this time. The next one I'm going to read is The Unwritten Rules of Animating Speedy Gonzalez. And boy, howdy, did I feel my age yesterday when I was teaching a class at a community college. And I had 7 kids look at me, wow, what's Speedy Gonzalez? So, kinda hurt. So, The Unwritten Rules of Animating Speedy Gonzalez. 1. Unlike other heroes, he is small and brown, so he must be perfect. Yes, he must never be harmed, but more importantly, he can never inflict harm. 2. Obviously, Speedy is fast, but he is also smart. The traps are not for him. They exist to be turned on the oppressor. 3. People will be offended. Ask yourself, are they offended because he is a stereotype or because he always wins? 4. Are you offended? Look, representation was in short supply. It was him and Roberto Clemente for a long time. That was it. 5. But the less you show is Primo, Slowpoke Rodriguez, the better. That shit is actually offensive. 6. And for real, we should tone down his accent a little. Maybe the sombrero too. Consider a nice fade into Chris Guayabara. 7. The cat in pursuit must be a metaphor. Capitalism, white supremacy, inadequate childcare. Pick your grievance, use that anger. 8. Speedy Gonzalez gets laid, like a lot. But this is a cartoon, so he's a friend of everyone's sister. 9. Speedy Gonzalez is the object of empathy. If you feel for the cat in pursuit, we will wonder where your loyalties are. 10. The worst that can happen to Speedy Gonzalez and really any living creature is humiliation. 11. Like in life, he must chase or be chased. These are the only 2 things. 12. Paradigms are limiting. Paradigms are freeing. They exist whether you want them to or not. I do not make the rules. 13. A thought. What if the chase is internal? Speedy Gonzalez, with no cats or sisters left to conquer, must deal with boredom, aging, and his abilities in decline. He needs to find new purpose as the faster creature, death, closes the gap minute by minute. 14. Never forget, this is just a cartoon. And for the last poem, and I think very fittingly, the last poem is a tribute to my grandmother. I like to tell people this is very much a real story. It's called Attack of the 50-Foot Abuela, and it will be in what is hopefully soon on forthcoming second collection. Attack of the 50-Foot Abuela. Manuela Rendon was stabbing the skid marks of her husband's underwear with a Tide pen when a comet appeared outside her window. Brief as it was, she saw something untethered to this world. She remembered the omens her mother told her as a child and grew through the roof of her modest home. With a mighty wepa, Manuela Rendon let her newfound power be known. Down came the oaks, down came the power lines. Away she went in her baby kitten sweater and hair rollers, away into the night. The men, they were not so nice. They said she is just being emotional because maybe her sons don't visit. Maybe her man isn't sticking it to her. Maybe she has seen her last red grasshopper. The NIMBYs piled on, snapping live footage of the brown, building-sized grandma, writing sarcastic captions about the increase in taco trucks and the decline in property values. They would all meet the business end of Manuela Rendon's sedan-sized chanclas. Her besties in the neighborhood who enjoyed chisme and cafecito cheered as she reduced her enemies to bone and mist. Good for her. They flew in the top negotiator in the country. They asked, "What do you want?" No one had ever asked Manuela Rendon this question before. Her demands were reasonable, even though she could have got more. To reopen the old drive-in, to play Cuna de Lobos every night, to have her sons visit without needing something, a nice cup of tea, her no-good husband served on a plate in chains. The demands were met, and Manuela Rendon and the neighborhood lived the rest of their lives in relative peace. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Woo! Woo, woo, woo!
Thank you so much, Vincent. That energy is infectious. Like, I absolutely love it. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to all the contributors. There's a lot of contributors. Please check out both the print and the online portion of the portfolio and check out the rest of the AGNI 99. I also want to thank the Transnational Literature Series at Brookline Booksmith, editors Ben Black and Jennifer De Leon, all our individual donors, and then just everybody in the audience for coming tonight. Super amazing. I'll take like a quick picture if you guys want to hold up your awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. Great to share the stage with you, and I hope you guys have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye, gang.
Thank
This was
you.
a blast, and thank you all for attending.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.